In Inventor, a good practice is to draw first and dimension later. Now what I mean by that is you want to create a rough sketch of your design first and then worry about going back and doing the nitty-gritty dimensions and locations and worrying about tolerances and everything else that goes into a functioning design. Think of it this way. If you were sitting in a cafeteria and you had a great idea, you just had to get down on paper before you lost it. You sit down, you grab your pencil and your paper or your napkin or whatever is available, and you do a rough sketch of your idea. You might put a couple notes on the side, but the general sketch is just a really rough overall shape. Later, you take that sketch, you put it into the computer, and you fine-tune it. And it works the same way in Inventor. When you're starting your new sketch, you do drawings first, so you worry about getting the general shape down first. Later you go back and you worry about tolerances and dimensions and everything else. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I have open in front of me a brand new part file. This part file is in English units or imperial units, meaning it's in inches. I'm going to go ahead and start a 2D sketch. In a previous video, I go over the steps to creating a brand new sketch. If you're unfamiliar with those, go ahead and click on the link. I'm going to start a sketch on my XZ plane, and I'm just going to straighten out my view cube in the top right-hand corner. Now we're going to draw our shape, and remember we're just drawing a rough shape for right now. So I'm going to place a 2-point rectangle arbitrarily on my screen, and because this command is still active, I'm going to go ahead and place a second rectangle on my screen. I don't have to open that command again, and I could continue placing 2-point rectangles on here if I wanted to. However, I'm going to move on now and place a center point circle. So I'm just going to grab that center point circle command and toss a couple of circles on my screen. Now it really doesn't matter where you place them, just notice I'm not drawing anything that's locked into my origin point or my center point. So when I talk about the origin point or the center point, that's the little yellow dot between the X and the Z axes on my screen here. So I'm not locking anything into place. Everything's just kind of floating out there. In Inventor, we use dimensional and geometric constraints in order to fully constrain or to finish our sketches. So in this video, I'm going to go over dimensional constraints. In your Sketch tab, make sure you're on your Sketch tab, follow the ribbon over to the right until you find the Constrain panel. In the Constrain panel, you'll find the dimensional constraints and the geometric constraints that you can use in order to fully constrain your sketch. This is the General Dimension button. Left-click on the General Dimension button to activate it. You'll notice it goes blue. And we're going to start by dimensioning the top line of our sketch here. There's a few different ways you can dimension a line, and we'll go over those. You're going to start by clicking on the top left corner. You'll notice the little corner point goes green as you hover your mouse over it. And if you let your mouse sit there, Inventor's actually going to give you a drop down here, and it's giving you all the options you can select at that point. So we're just going to click that top corner point. Now, we're saying we want to dimension from this point to another point. So let's go grab the corner point at the right-hand side of our rectangle. So again, find that little green dot. And you'll notice once you pick both points, Inventor has a distance to measure. It's saying, okay, we'll give you the linear distance from this point to this point. So we're getting our horizontal dimension here. Go ahead and left-click to place that dimension on your screen. Now when you place that, depending on what settings you have set up, you're going to get the Edit Dimension dialog box. For right now, we're just going to accept this at whatever value pops up. It's okay if yours is 2 point something or 40 point something. Don't worry about the value for now. Right now, we're just going to accept whichever value pops up. Let's go ahead and dimension the left side line now. Now, with the first dimension, we went from corner to corner. Another way you can do linear dimensions in Inventor is to select from line to line. So go ahead and select that top horizontal line on your rectangle. Move your mouse down to the bottom horizontal line and select it. And you'll notice Inventor is going to give us a dimension that goes from this line to this line because those two lines are parallel. move your mouse out to the left. Now when I place dimensions on my sketches, there's a couple things I watch out for. I want them to be close enough to the sketch that I can easily find them and read them. What I mean by that is I don't want my dimension way off to the side here, off the side of the screen. But I also don't want my dimension inside of my sketch. It shouldn't be overlapping my sketch, and it definitely shouldn't be overlapping the line here so that you can't read the number. Notice if I place this right here, I actually wouldn't be able to read the 9.331. The one's kind of hiding. So I like to place it just to the outside of my sketch, something like here. And again, for now, we're just going to click that green check mark and accept the value at whatever value it is right now. The third way you can dimension a horizontal or vertical line is just to click on the line itself. So again, my general dimension button is still active, so we're still good to go. Go ahead and click on that horizontal line on your smaller rectangle. You'll notice just by selecting the line, Inventor is going to give us a dimension of the length of that line. So one click. Again, we're going to drag that to the outside of our shape and just place that and accept the value. Now let's go ahead and do the height of the smaller rectangle. So again, I'm just going to select that line, drag that to the outside of my shape, place it, and accept the value. So you should have 4 dimensions on your screen right now, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal. To edit the values of your dimensions, if your general dimension button is active, you only need to click on those dimensions once. The Edit Dimension dialog box will pop up, and in here you can edit the value. If your general dimension button is not active, you just need to double click on the values in order to edit them. And then the same Edit Dimension dialog box will pop up. So now let's go ahead all together here. We're going to double click on the largest dimension here, the length of the biggest rectangle. Here's a quick little tip for you when you're designing your shapes in Inventor. You want to dimension the largest features first and then work inwards to the smallest features. Sometimes when you place dimensions on your sketches, your sketch will do what's called distortion. It will actually cross over itself and kind of lose that general design intent that you put so much work into with your overall rough sketch. So start with the biggest dimensions and work inwards to the smallest dimensions. That should give you the best success when dimensioning your shape. So double click on the length of this rectangle, and we're going to change this to a length of 25. So type in 25, and that will be in 25 inches, and you can either hit the green check mark or hit enter on your keyboard. Notice that Inventor automatically updated the top and bottom horizontal lines so that your rectangle kept its 90-degree angles in all 4 corners. Now let's go ahead and edit the height of this rectangle. So double click or just single click depending on if your general dimension button is active, and type in 10. Let's change the length of the smaller rectangle now. So find the length, the horizontal dimension of the smaller rectangle, and type in 20. Change the height of the smaller rectangle to 8. Now we're going to right click, and if you have your general dimension button open, just choose the OK button to close that. Now if you want to move these temporary dimensions, or if you want to move your sketch dimensions out of the way, so for example my 8 is kind of overlapping my x-axis here and it's kind of hard to read, plus it's also on the inside of my shape, which I don't like. So just make sure your general dimension button is not active, otherwise this won't work. But you can just left click and hold. So left click and hold, and you can actually move these dimensions around. So that comes in handy sometimes when you're trying to select part of your sketch and the dimensions are in the way. So you can just move them to where you want them to be. So again, if you need to move your top ones, just left click and hold, and you can drag them to wherever you need them on your page. Now if I want to change my dimension values again, so I changed my length of my biggest rectangle to 25 inches to start with, but I actually want that to be 22. So you can edit these as many times as you need until they are the values that your design needs. So I'm going to double click on that 25 and change that to 22. And notice that my rectangle updates to match those changes. Now we're going to dimension the size of our circles, so click on that general dimension button again to activate it, and with the general dimension button it's actually very handy. You don't need to pick a bunch of different buttons for all the different types of dimensions you're placing on here. So for our circle, we're looking for a diameter of our circle. You just left click on the circle and Inventor automatically recognizes that it is a circle. It's a full non-broken circle, so it's going to give us that diameter dimension. So we're going to drag that outside of our shape so it's out of the way and type in a diameter of 2. Go ahead and dimension your second circle to also have a diameter of 2. Every dimension we've placed onto our screen up to this point have been what are called size dimensions. There's two different types of dimensional constraints we talk about in Inventor. There are size dimensions, and then there are location dimensions. So size dimensions actually change things like the length of a line, the size of a circle, the size of a slot, the length of an angle. It actually changes the physical size of your sketches. Location dimensions do not change the size of your shape. Location dimensions actually just place all of your little sketch features where you want them in relation to one another. So what I mean by that is currently my little rectangle here is sort of overlapping my big rectangle. I actually want this little rectangle to be located in the center of my big rectangle. So let's place a location dimension on here. I'm going to dimension from the left vertical line of my larger rectangle to the left vertical line of my smaller rectangle, and we want this to be centered, so that's going to be a value of 1. So go ahead, edit that dimension to 1 inch. And what we did there is we didn't change the size of anything, we just changed the location of these two rectangles with regards to one another. Now I'm going to dimension from the top horizontal line of my big rectangle to the top horizontal line of my small rectangle, drag that out of the way here, and we're going to change that one to a value of 1 as well. I'm getting 1 inch because I'm taking 10 inches minus 8 inches divided by 2. So the length, the height of the bigger rectangle minus the height of the smaller rectangle, and just dividing that by 2 for the 2 gaps on both sides. So right now, my rectangles are centered around one another. The gap is even, it's a 1 inch gap all the way around. So those were location dimensions. Let's practice that a little bit more. Let's locate our circles inside of this shape. So I'm going to dimension from the left-hand vertical line of my smaller rectangle to the center point of my first circle. Let's change that to a distance of 5. Now I'm going to do the same thing from the other end of my rectangle, so from the right hand, this time the right hand vertical line of my smaller rectangle to the center point of my other circle, we're going to change that one to a distance of 5 as well. So for my circles, so far I've located them horizontally, but now I need to locate them vertically within my shape. So I'm going to dimension from the top horizontal line of my small rectangle to the center point of my circle here, and we're going to put in a distance of 4. And do the same thing for the other circles. So from the top line of my smaller rectangle to the center of my circle, type in a height of 4. So now all of my rectangles and my circles on my screen are all dimensioned in size, and they're also dimensioned in location to one another. Now there's one last thing we want to do. We actually want to dimension our sketch with regards to the center point of our screen, so the origin point between the X and the Z axes. So what we're going to do is we're going to center our entire sketch around that origin point. So we're going to create a dimension from the left-hand line, the very left-hand vertical line of our big rectangle, to the origin point on the screen. It's that little yellow dot where your X and your Z axis meet. Drag that out of the way, and that one's going to be a distance of 11 to center it. Again, we've just done the horizontal constraint. Now we need to do the vertical constraint. You'll also notice something here. When we put our dimension of 11 inches on here, notice that some of these lines turned black. When your sketch lines turn black, that means they are fully constrained, which means I cannot grab these lines and move them. Let me show you. So right now I'm going to grab this purple line on my screen. And if I grab it, I can move it up and down still because the purple lines are not fully constrained. They can still move. They still have some degrees of freedom on your screen here. Now if I grab one of these black lines and try to move it, notice that nothing happens. I grab that black line, I'm trying to drag it around, it's not moving because it's fully constrained. And this is a goal for all of your sketches. You should try to fully constrain all of your sketches. So let's finish this one. We're going to dimension from the top line to the origin point, and we're going to dimension that to be 5. Notice that our entire sketch now has turned black. Nothing is left purple on our screen. This means that our sketch is fully constrained, it is fixed in place. Nothing is going to get modified that you don't intentionally come in here and modify. So this is what we want. We are now done dimensioning our sketch, and you can go ahead and click on Finish Sketch.